This is Real Sankara Hours. Real Sankara Hours. Follow us at Sankara Hours on Twitter. This is Adam Hudson. Follow me at Adam Hudson 5 on Twitter.
And this is Peter MGunn. Follow me at MGunn Peter. Um,
Yeah, and
we have a bit of an odd schedule because we yesterday we recorded the bonus episode, which gives all of our election type takes. So if you want to know what that's about, uh, check that out. Subscribe on Patreon. Um, Today we're switching it up, and we're gonna be talking less about the election because both of us hate talking about it. So we've got
yeah,
another topic today.
yeah, we're going to be talking about Tupac Shakur, his
Who's
life
that?
and his. So for any, especially for some of you younger folks, Tupac Shakur was a very famous rapper who
The
was
greatest of all
very,
time.
yeah, definitely. I'd say, yeah, I would argue the same that he's probably the greatest rapper who ever lived, if not one of the top five. Because I'm sure some people will be like, Rakim's the greatest, KRS-One's the greatest.
Um,
Well, I mean,
I have a very specific argument for why he's the greatest, but we'll get into that later. Uh,
yeah, yeah. I just want to make like, yeah, so we are on Patreon, so follow us, patreon.com/, real Sankara hours. We are also on Spotify now, so you can find us on Spotify. We will be on Apple iTunes podcast very soon. So yeah, we're around on social media. And also, I mean, just a quick update, coronavirus, the World Health Organization just announced that it's a pandemic. So the best way to avoid coronavirus is to avoid large gatherings of people of more than, 50 people. So yeah, it it impacted my job. So classes, teaching classes like aren't going to be held face to face. More of it's going to be online. So yeah, I mean, so when it comes to coronavirus, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, take care of people around you. Um, and yeah, I just wanted to just announce that because that was announced just today. The WHO just announced that coronavirus is a global pandemic, which is something I've never witnessed in my lifetime. So, yeah.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, so all right, yeah, let's just get into it. Tupac Shakur. Um so I guess yeah, we can start with how we came to I guess how we first started listening to Tupac. Do you want to start, Peter? Like, how
Sure.
I guess yeah, the first time you started listening to him, and I guess like what drew you to him.
Well, I mean, admittedly, this is why we started talking about this again. I mean, I always knew who he was, but I never sat down and engaged with the oeuvre, his body of work,
Yeah.
let's say, until a few months ago. And I had been meaning to do this for a while, but I had taken some acid and I was trying to get into a because I'm weird like this. I was trying to get into like a sinister kind of dark energy vibe. So after going through a bunch of stuff, I tried listening to some Wagner. It wasn't cutting it. Um, I had on the docket uh, the Don Killuminati 7 Day Theory album because I had heard how kind of weird it is. And then that sort of listening to that kind of threw like my whole understanding of like who he was as an artist into like relief, I guess, in the sense of I understood like what he was actually doing. And so then I like went back through all of his other albums, alongside obviously like the most famous songs, but I so that's what really got me like thinking about him a lot recently. And also like um the he'd be at work, like I guess the Pandora station my coworker would play, it would be like the boozy Pandora station, but it would be playing a lot of Tupac. So we'd be talking about it, and like even one of my coworkers who grew up in Serbia talks about how he like grew up listening to Tupac and how important it was to him. So, it really made me think about it, but
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say the first time I think I really got into Tupac, I was in high school, right around uh, my I say like my junior year of high school, somewhere around there. I mean, I knew who he was, but I really started listening to him um, in high school, just dealing with you know, uh, being a young black male raised by a single mother and not having a father figure around, and Tupac grew up similarly, so I felt a kind of particular sort of like kind of kinship to his music because of that at the time. So yeah, his music kind of spoke to me in that respect as I was trying to, like every teenager, sort of try to figure out who you are and where you fit in this world. And um, even as a teenager, I was pretty political, so a lot of his politics drew me in, and particularly his social commentary about the black condition in America and the struggles of black urban life. Um, I thought like a lot of those themes kind of resonated with me because there's a lot of overlap between that and growing up in Pittsburgh, California, and also like there was sort of a regional attachment because Tupac got he wasn't born in the Bay Area, but he got a start in the Bay Area, so um, yeah, there's a kind of like sort of regional kind of gravitation I had to him because of that Bay Area affiliation. Um, so yeah, in high school, I started listening to him, but I think as I got older, I still listen to him, but I think my perspective on him is probably more mature than I was when I was around like 17 years old. But I still think, to this day that he's, yeah, the greatest rapper, if not one of the greatest rappers to live. And I think he has a very deep um, cultural impact. And especially as, and I'm glad we're doing this episode because actually, I'll throw this question up and then we can both discuss it just off the top of my head. But like, the state of rap music in terms of where he's at. Do you think Peter? Because I have my own thoughts, but I'm wondering what your thoughts on. Do you think Tupac is given the amount of respect that he deserves? Given because right now, rap is the cultural global zeitgeist, which I don't think was really the case when you and I were in high school. So like now that rap is
not
like
quite.
basically this, yeah, it's an omnipresent cultural zeitgeist, right? So, um, because I've heard like some quote unquote haters of Tupac who were into like um who the fuck was that one rapper Lil Xan
Well,
who said
Zan,
like Tupac, yeah,
who?
so
What did he
yeah,
say? I don't remember what he said. Was it that he
let
didn't
me
know Tupac, or that he thought it was whack? Basically.
let me look it up, but yeah, as I look it up, why don't you answer like, yeah, like do you think Tupac is given the proper respect he deserves as a cultural figure in rap music
I
given where it's at right
well,
now?
I think that for like real hip hop fans, his legacy is pretty secure. I think for maybe a lot of younger kids, um, yeah, I don't know if he's quite as well known unless they listen to older stuff, unless they specifically listen to '90s stuff. I also think that um, for some reason, I think it's because of just like the Brooklynification of America and the world. People like no, Biggie Smalls has become more of a, I guess, a cultural meme. Like people, I feel like he gets referenced more now, especially by white people, than Tupac does, and I think there are some reasons for this. One is, like I said, New York centrism. Two is that Biggie, for some reason, is easier to co opt as, like, sort of just a cultural figure. Whereas, like, Tupac had a very specific legacy and a very specific message. And it's harder for, like, white gentrifiers to just be like, I love Tupac without, you know,
Hmm.
having to go a little bit deeper.
So I just looked up the so quote. So basically, I think he was. I guess Lil Xan was supposed to give like some sort of clout scale ranking for Tupac. Like so, and he gave Tupac a two, and I think the highest score was a 10. He gave Tupac a two and said his music was boring. So even Waka Flocka said that Lil Xan is banned from hip hop after Lil Xan called Tupac's music boring. But I bring up Lil Xan because I do think even though he caught some pushback, I do think that I don't think he's alone in expressing that sentiment, at least in this current um, not even just the current younger generation of listeners of hip hop, but like I think where hip hop is at as a cultural force. And what I'm really trying to get at is that like um, I think there are things going on with the state of rap music that makes someone like Lil Xan feel comfortable for saying something like that in public.
Yeah, I think there's probably two things going on. One is that because it's like it's a problem that any sort of like pioneer type figure has, in the sense that like there are so many people who have bitten his style that it's so omnipresent that you almost don't understand what it was like before him. So when perhaps someone like Lil Xan hears Tupac, then they don't understand like how significant it was at the time. I think the other thing is also he probably thinks equi- equates Tupac with just like, I guess, the positive stuff, and hasn't probably never listened to like the actual Thug Life album, which is, I don't know how you could call that boring. um I mean,
Right.
he
Yeah.
really like. I don't think there's anyone who's been able to sort of put you in the driver's seat and sort of explain like this specific mentality and make you feel like you're there better than Tupac. So I think he probably just thinks that Tupac is all like changes and not, yeah, like the actual Thug Life album, which Interscope did, like, basically was not going to release. I think they didn't want to release it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Thug Life. I mean, like Tupac's music got me through some, rough times, and I consider Thug Life to be one of those albums that was, helpful for me at least. But um, yeah, I think like where um rap is at right now, um, I think there was kind of a different mentality um in the 80s and the 90s when it came to rap, and then I think there is a shift that happened somewhere around, like I say, the mid 2000s to the late 2000s to the 2010s. And I think with 80s and 90s rap, even though were a lot of rap songs that did well commercially, um, that wasn't the primary motivation of a lot of rappers. Like they weren't purely motivated to get not even just mainstream,
Hmm.
but like to be pop artists, right? So I think right now where we're at with rap is I think there's a big blurring of lines between what rap music and pop music is. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, pop music was usually like Michael Jackson, Madonna, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera. That was the pop world. Whereas today, pop music and rap music are kind of blurred. It's like Bruno Mars and then Cardi B, and
Yeah.
then there's this, and even pop songs these days almost sound like rap songs. So that's where rap is right now. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, rap was still its own thing, and it still had, I think, deeper roots in Black America. And so I think like people who look at rap in the latter way, that it's its own thing, it's rooted in Black American aesthetics, story, struggle. Um, I think people who are rooted in looking at rap in that way view Tupac differently versus um, I don't want to just pick on younger listeners, but I do think, yeah, there is a generational divide, because if your primary reference with rap music is people like Kanye West, Drake, and if that's who you grew up with as like the standard bearers in rap music, then someone like Tupac Shakur is gonna seem quote unquote boring. And
Yeah.
so that's what I mean that, yeah, that's why I mean that like something's happening with the state of rap music that makes someone like Lil Xan feel comfortable for saying that Tupac's music is boring. Because if you think rap music and pop music are basically blurred, yeah, because Tupac's music is not pop music.
Yeah.
He like
So
there's nothing.
though, I mean, let's be clear, like it was a capitalist enterprise. He
Right.
was very explicit about that, especially in the latter parts of his career. And gangster rap was always like existed to sell records. But there wasn't,
Right.
yeah, but in the 90s, I mean, there was an anxiety about quote unquote turning pop. And it was that even if like your only goal was making money, you were making money representing a specific music. And yeah, there were pop rappers like MC Hammer, but the whole point was that you wanted to be famous and set and go quadruple platinum or whatever, like
Yeah.
representing, I mean, what you understood to be realness. And so, yeah, that distinction and that anxiety about selling out like doesn't exist now. So it's really just entirely about money. And so that's
Yeah.
why you have someone like Drake, I guess, and Jay-Z really was like the pinnacle of the idea that like it doesn't, the more money I make, the less you can criticize me artistically.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, like when I say pop, I'm saying pop in the sense of like there's a set um musical kind of framework, formula, and aesthetics that make something sound quote unquote pop as a sound. But yeah, like I mean, there was all I mean, Tupac Shakur, a lot of those rappers from the '90s, they wanted to make money, but I think uh, you know, uh, even at that time, like they weren't really trying to make pop records in the sense of sounding pop. Because yeah,
Yeah.
MC Hammer, his records sounded pop, whereas Nas records, Tupac records, Bone Thugs and Harmony records, they sold well, they made money, a lot of money, but the sound was not a pop sound, because at the
Yeah.
time, particularly in the '90s, pop music was like, like that was like. Especially the late '90s, it was like NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, although they came out after Tupac and Biggie
Yeah.
died. But yeah, the pop sound of the '90s was early '90s would have been, yeah, Michael Jackson. Like Michael Jackson's sound would have been pop
New
music.
kids on the block.
New Kids on the Block, yeah. So
New
that was the
edition.
pop. Yeah, that was the pop sound. So because I do remember even growing up, even I'll even set this up for context, because I remember, when BET, they had a show called Rap City. Um, and there was 106 in Park, there's Rap City, and then there's MTV's TRL. MTV's TRL was largely the stuff you listen to for like what's on the top 40 kind of Billboard music. the basically, if you wanted to know what pop music was at the time, particularly in the late '90s and the 2000s, TRL was your
These
plug.
kids don't even know about TRL. They like have no
Yeah, total.
idea what it is.
So, so Total Request Live. It was a show on MTV, Total Request Live, and people would request their favorite music videos. But that show was basically a very good window to see, like, okay, these are the pop records. This is the top 40 stuff that's going on at the time. 106 and Park was on BET, Black Entertainment Television. That was like a black version of TRL, and it was mostly what's the latest in hip hop and R&B music. Rap City was basically for, like, if you want the real shit, like the real rap music, Rap City was your go-to. And I say that because the first time I heard about the Neptunes and Pharrell, before Pharrell became Pharrell, was Rap City. And this is when the Neptunes were kind of like, you had to be like a real head to know who the Neptunes were, and they were only, my first exposure to the Neptunes was Rap City. Um, I feel like I'm getting sidetracked, but my point
Yeah,
is that, like, I think that there's a when we're thinking about Tupac's legacy and his relevance to today, I think, yeah, he we're looking at rap music in a very different sort of time period and cultural period versus um, when it used to be.
yeah. So,
Um,
so maybe let's start. Maybe let's go through, I guess, his life and career because it was actually a very short career. I mean, he was
yeah,
only it was only 5 years that he was like releasing music, but um, yeah, he was born in New York City, I think. Grew up in
yeah,
Baltimore,
hmm
to his mother famously was a Black Panther, um, Afeni
Afeni
Shakur,
Shakur,
and
yeah,
Asada Shakur was actually his godmother. That's true.
hmm
So
yeah,
he very much was steeped in this Black nationalist militant tradition,
hmm
and he makes references to this in some of his interviews, and that's obviously where he got a lot of his political consciousness. Um, eh,
yeah. I'll piggyback off of that. So yeah, so his mother was Afeni Shakur, who passed away a couple years ago, and she was a member of the Black Panther Party. His dad, he didn't know his father, um, and Afeni Shakur was actually pregnant with Tupac Shakur when she was in prison, because during that time, of the Black Panther Party, there was a lot of real government suppression of black militant groups like the Panthers. And so Afeni Shakur was pregnant with Tupac when she was in jail. So, you know, he's basically a child and a product of um, the Black Panther Party and the legacy of black radicalism in America. And that's where he got his, yeah, as Peter said, that's where he got his consciousness from. That's where he learned a lot about history, politics. Um, Also, yeah, he was born in New York City, but he moved to Baltimore, and he went to an art school where he became friends with Jada Pinkett Smith, and his friendship with Jada Pinkett Smith lasted until he died. So, um, yeah, Jada Pinkett Smith, she's married to, very famous actress, married to Will Smith. Jada Pinkett Smith has this Facebook um, channel or segment called Red Table Talks. So, yeah, so Jada Pinkett and Tupac Shakur were friends until he died. I'll mention I'll mention his Bay Area connection. So in 1988, his family moved from Baltimore to Marin City. So for those of you who don't know, Marin City is basically an unincorporated community in Marin County. Marin County is a very wealthy, mostly white county in the Bay Area. So Marin County is basically, if you're familiar with San Francisco, and you go right across the Golden Gate Bridge, you're in Marin County. So Marin County is very, very affluent, very white. Marin City is the complete opposite, very poor and mostly black, and it's basically a poor black neighborhood in the middle of immense wealth and a lot of white people. And so he grew up, he lived his life mostly poor. So that also had a huge impact on his consciousness and even his music. So a lot of the themes about black urban life you see in his music, you can trace it to his experience living in Marin City, California, in Marin County, because there were interviews with a lot of his uh, rap partners like Mopreme Shakur and his friends and cousins, who basically said that living in Marin City was sort of like the experience they felt was that the rich white people were teasing them because you're
Yeah.
basically living in what was like a slum, a ghetto, and you're surrounded by basically $1 million homes. Um, so I think that's also important to consider when it comes to Tupac's life and how it shaped him.
Yeah, I will say that that kind of experience, especially, is what kind of fuels a lot of revolutionary spirit. Is seeing
Hmm.
basically both sides of how people live. Um, how the bourgeoisie live, and then also knowing the experience of poverty and seeing them right next to each other. I mean, I also forgot that, yeah, he actually like joined when he was in Baltimore in high school. He joined the Young Communist League. Like, he was really out there in terms early on in terms of his in terms of politics. I mean, he was going to join. They offered him the chairmanship of the new African Black Panther Party, um, and he basically turned it down to have a music career. Right? Do you know that?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to look into that, but I mean, it's definitely. I mean, it's definitely true that yeah, he was affiliated with the Young Communist League when he was in Baltimore, and he also said there is a woman named Layla Steinberg, who's she's a poet and a writer in the Bay Area, and he attended poetry classes taught by Layla Steinberg in 1989, and that's how he kind of she was the one who she really kind of I guess you could say discovered him, but she really encouraged him to keep up with his poetry, and then he I think she had organized a concert with Tupac Shakur, and then he met a manager who set him up to be a roadie and a backup dancer for the group Digital Underground in 1990. So Digital Underground is a Bay Area alternative hip hop group. They're from Oakland, and the leader is a guy named Shock G. And he sometimes goes by the character named Humpty Hump. But anyway, so Tupac Shakur was a roadie and backup dancer for Digital Underground, and then the song, I think it was Same Song, that Tupac Shakur he did a verse on it, and that's when he first came on the public spotlight. I believe the song was called Same Song. Yeah, Same Song. He Tupac did a verse on it, and that's when he that's basically was Tupac's real music debut.
Yeah.
And it was after that, yeah. And then in 1991, he released his debut solo album, which was Tupacalypse Now, and that's when you really begin to see um, him talk about like that was really I think you really get a sense of his politics and his commentary coming through in his music. So Tupacalypse Now I think is a really good album to see like where Tupac was beginning as an artist, and he
Yeah.
he had songs like Brenda's Got a Baby. So all the social injustices um, that he was witnessing in places like Marin City, but also throughout the Bay Area and throughout the country, and particularly, and I think this is where actually, so Peter, you can probably talk about like the context of the 90s, because yeah, so this is 1991
Yeah.
when he released Tupacalypse Now. So why don't you talk about like the 90s and like the sort of war on drugs and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tupacalypse Now. I mean, he didn't like that album did moderately well. He wasn't a huge star in the first two
Hmm.
albums. And it's also very I also find it interesting cuz if you listen to it now, it sounds very Public Enemy-esque. Like there's a lot of Bomb Squad type production. But yeah, what Adam's referring to, and the thing that sort of crystallized to me is basically right in the 90s, you have the war on drugs and mass incarceration sort of at full speed. And a lot of the music a lot of uh, what was understood to be rap at the time, though I think now I don't think people really use that term, was reflective of that. A lot. I'm trying to remember what's on his first album, but yeah, there's a lot of. I think there's like one song where he specifically talks about getting into a shootout with the police, um, and there's there's another. Sorry, there's and then so that one then strictly for my niggas comes out the next
Hmm.
in 93,
I think
right?
yeah, it's 93. Yeah, and also for Tupacalypse Now, I think this is to really kind of hammer Peter's point home is then Vice President Dan Quayle's. This is during George H.W. Bush's presidency. So the father of George W. Bush. This is his presidency. Um, even though the album didn't perform, it performed moderately well. It was certified gold. So it was a gold record. It wasn't platinum yet, but Dan Quayle criticized the
Mm-hmm.
album because there was apparently, yeah, someone murdered a Texas state trooper, and then I think Dan Quayle is basically trying to say that the murder was influenced by Tupac's lyrics. Um, at the time, there was definitely this feeling of black people, particularly black men, are a threat to public safety and public order, and that's how you got stuff like the 1994 crime bill, Hillary Clinton calling, basically the super predator comment. So there was in the 90s, a very strong fear within white America about black people and crime and drugs.
Yeah.
And hip hop became cultural public enemy number one because a lot of politicians were basically saying that rap music, particularly hardcore rap, gangster rap, was
Was caught. It was
influencing
caught.
this
Yeah, it
crime
was
wave.
caught. Which, if you think about it now, it's completely absurd. But at the time, people really believed this,
Yeah.
and not just white people. A lot
Hmm.
of respectable black people believed that it was the music itself that that was the cause of these conditions in that period of time, which you know is it's crazy, but because they're speaking to a subjectivity and a reality that had been ignored for so long, I can understand. And
Hmm.
on some level you can argue there's a glorification or something, but I mean, I go back and forth on that because there's definitely like they've definitely played things up and then claimed it was real life, and some of that was a ploy to sell records. But there,
Yeah.
they didn't construct it out of whole cloth. I mean, it was a reflection of a reality they at least grew up in, if not like were directly participating in.
I want to bring up there's a comment that Billie Eilish said about rap music that um she got a lot of pushback on, but I think the argument she's saying basically um rehashes some of these. Hold on, I'm trying to find basically she said that rap music is full of a lot of posturing. And let me find the quote. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay, yeah. So she was. It was an interview with Vogue. Um, and she said basically that much of rap music today, rappers are lying. She said there are tons of songs where people are just lying. There's a lot of that in rap right now from people that I know who rap. It's like I got my AK-47 and I'm fucking and I'm like, what? You don't have a gun. And my bitches, and I'm like, which bitches? That's posturing, and that's not what I'm doing. And there's a lot of pushback. Like
Yeah.
my basic response is that like in any kind of music, music's not a
Yeah,
documentary, right? So when you're listening,
all art
um,
is lying. That's like what makes it art. It's not literally happening. People are creating a reality that is immersive, that makes you think that it's happening. It's not, but it's not real. That's the whole point.
right, yeah, and also like as we're talking about Tupac Shakur and his upbringing, his songs were not documentaries per se, but they did reflect something real. It was based in some very concrete reality that he was exposed to, that his peers were exposed to, and a lot of people within Black America were exposed to, particularly in inner city Black urban life. Themes like um, violence, crime, teenage pregnancy, police violence, rampant police violence, um, having to sell drugs in order to escape poverty. Those realities are real. Like
Yeah.
that's not made up. There are journalists who document the reality of that stuff, but as a rapper, Tupac and people like him were basically providing an sort of an artistic portrayal of that real life.
Yeah. The
So it's not it's make believe, but it's based in
but
something real. Versus you could argue with Billie Eilish's music. Look, like I mean, she's lying as
I
much as
don't
anyone
listen to
else
Billie
is.
Eilish, so I can't speak on that. But what I will say is that Tupac, especially, one of the reasons that like I come back to him is that he more than anyone was able to straddle that line perfectly. Wherein like some people had to sort of rest on an authenticity claim, like I really did the shit I was talking about. um, Tupac was able to basically say like this is a mentality that I sometimes have because of where I grew up. So when he talks about bust on motherfuckers with a passion, better duck because I ain't looking when I'm blasting. He's not literally talking. We both know that he doesn't literally do that, but he like all the pain and the scars of a violent society that are on him makes him think about wanting to do it, and he's expressing those feelings. And that's the that subtlety is something that gets overlooked because people don't believe that like hip hop is actually art. And in many ways because of racism, it's kind of like how Duke Ellington wouldn't put music stands in front of his band when they were performing because white people he didn't want white people the white audiences wouldn't believe that those black musicians could read music. So it's the same kind of thing, especially when they use lyrics like in literal trials where it's like, oh no, he said I killed that guy or whatever, and like as evidence. But they can't just admit that like this is an art, and like any art, sometimes it's a product of art imitates life, life imitates art. It's a dialectic. But for some reason black hip-hop artists aren't given that credit.
Yeah, I mean, when Johnny Cash said, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die," I don't think many people believe that like he meant that literally. It was a song.
Yeah.
So, it's the same with rap music, right? And this actually ties into this is a good segue into my main overall, I guess, thesis and feelings and about Tupac and who he is as a cultural figure. and I see Tupac as basically a blues artist. He's a rapper, obviously. He's rapping. That's his art form. Was rapping, right? But if you look at his the themes he talk about, his subject matter, and also the kind of very raw emotion he had in his lyrics, um, there's something very blues about it. That's very similar to, I think, particularly the Mississippi Delta blues and the the themes that were portrayed in Delta blues music.
Mm.
Um, because Delta blues, going back to like Lead Belly and those guys, blues music, aesthetically, you can even trace blues music's roots to West African folk music in terms of the scales and stuff like that. So like, there's an actual set of musical principles at play that make it the blues in the same way that like, okay, there is a black musical aesthetic and principles operating that make something rap music. But the putting the aesthetics and the musical principles aside, in terms of the stories that are conveyed, I think there's a lot of similarities between the life of black people in the Mississippi Delta in the Deep South, particularly during the toward the end of slavery and immediately after slavery and that period of Jim Crow. The themes depicted by blues musicians at the time are not that different than the themes depicted by rappers like Tupac when it came to black life in the inner cities in the 1980s and the 1990s. There's a lot of overlap when it comes to violence, crime, poverty, and having to survive amidst deep poverty and deep institutional violence um, being placed on you and your community. Um, and also a very raw look at black suffering in those conditions and portrayed in such a way that I think, can be pretty unsettling to people who aren't used to
Yeah.
hearing it. And I think that's often, yeah, and that's like, when we think about Tupac's music, I think sometimes some of the reaction to his music stems from people who probably aren't used to that kind of uncensored, unfiltered, raw emotion about, you know, depicting and having to deal with real um, institutionalized violence and the suffering that comes as a result of it. So, in that respect, even when I first listened to Tupac, I always felt like there was something about it that felt very blues. And having listened to more blues music as I got older and listening to Tupac's music now with fresh eyes, with more mature eyes, I think there's a lot of parallels you can make between
Mm.
the black blues music and Tupac's music. So my main sort of takeaway in terms of how I see Tupac is that he's basically, even though he's a rapper, I think there's a lot of his music that still stands in that black American blues tradition in terms of the themes that are talked about. And even if you look at some of the lyrics by blues musicians, they're not
No.
pretty. And even Lead Belly like spent time in prison. Lead Belly spent like he was getting in fights with people, getting stabbed by people, stabbing other people. He spent time in prison, but Lead Belly still regarded as one of the greatest blues musicians who ever lived, and very influential. And there'd also be no like a lot of those British rock bands, they wouldn't exist without
Yeah.
someone like Lead Belly. So he set a standard in terms of blues music and rock music. That's important. I think you can say the
Yeah.
same with Tupac.
Speaking of prison, I suppose it's not a great transition, but we should probably. So after his second album comes out, does moderately well. This is when he gets arrested. It's kind of, I won't say funny, but it is interesting that when he gets arrested in New York for sexual assault charges, that's kind of when he actually becomes really famous. Like he he becomes more of a national figure because of this trial. Um, and do you you know do you want to, or I'll just go through, I guess. Yeah. He gets arrested in New York. He eventually they plead him down to like it's something like felony sexual battery or something, which is what he gets convicted
Yeah.
of.
Hmm.
It's like forcibly groping is I think is officially the charge they he
Yeah.
gets pled down to. And I don't he gets
Yeah.
sentenced
That
like
was it.
4 years and then gets bailed out. Which I'm still a little bit confused about how he got bailed out, but I think he got sentenced to time served because he was in jail basically like
So
while he was on
yeah.
trial, right?
Yeah. So Tupac had a number of legal troubles before the sexual assault conviction. I mean, he even though like his music was arguably very eloquent in terms of discussing social issues that impacted black people, like as a human being he was just he was a
He
loose
was
cannon
a
basically. He was
he
getting in
was a
fights, he had a
free
lot of
he
legal
was a
troubles.
free spirit, I guess. He
Yeah, yeah. So I'll go through some of his legal issues before the sexual assault conviction. Uh, so he actually did get beat up by OPD for jaywalking, Oakland Police Department, and he settled a suit with them. Um, then there was a party in Marin City. It was like a festival, and then I guess there was a fight that broke out, and someone shot a 6-year-old boy and killing him. Um, he I think he was accused of attempting to hit a rapper, beat up a rapper with a baseball bat. Um,
well, I thought that was on the
he
set
also
of
he
Poetic Justice or something.
I think
He went
so, yeah.
after
And
he
then in
went
early
after Alan
'94.
Hughes, I think, or Juice.
Oh, that was yeah. This so the Hughes one was in
Yeah,
'94, early '94. Yeah, he was found guilty of basically beating up the
Menace to
co-director of Menace
Society.
to Society, and he served 15 days. Yeah, so Tupac had a number of legal troubles. And then yeah, in '93, November '93. So basically, there is a woman named Ayanna Jackson. And actually, in the show notes, she did an interview with DJ Vlad 2 years ago, basically giving her side of the story. I'm gonna put that in the show notes. It's a 1 hour interview, um, and basically, they had prior, according to both of them, they had prior sexual encounters, and then I guess it was yeah, so it was in November 1993. Tupac Shakur and basically other people who were in his entourage, they were charged with sexually assaulting her. Tupac Shakur denied. Well, he claimed that he was in a separate room from where the assault took place. Like I guess the assault took place in one room of the hotel room, and then he was in another room taking a nap, and that it was his entourage who assaulted her. And he claimed before he died that he was guilty of not being a smarter man and not looking after her. But Ayanna Jackson, what she said is that he was in the room and uh, he did play a role in sexually assaulting her. And so yeah, so he was charged with yeah, it was a I think sexual battery or something like that. And so that's what he was charged with. Um, and yeah, that was a very high profile case. Um, and then he was, and I really want to, particularly in the light of, we're both two heterosexual guys talking about this kind of issue, and you know, I do take, you know, um, listening to victims seriously. So, because of that, I do encourage our listeners to listen to what Ayanna Jackson said in that interview with DJ Vlad on her own terms, because what she also said was before Tupac died, he called her up and apologized to her, and they both made amends. Um, Contrast that with like the numerous other cases of sexual assault and rape throughout the country. It's very, very rare you see, you know, the offender trying to make amends with the victim. So
Yeah,
Tupac did do that, and she was very clear about that. and she was also very clear that she wasn't trying to undermine his legacy, but her main point is that she wanted to get her side of the story out because there is a film about Tupac Shakur that came out, and she felt that she wasn't depicted accurately. So I would encourage people to listen to her side of the story, uncensored, unfiltered, because I think when we talk about sexual assault and rape, I think it's important to listen to victim stories, unfiltered, uncensored, and
Yeah.
people can make up their own mind. So that interview is going to be in the show
Yeah.
notes, so people
And
can
I
listen
guess
to
the
it.
point I want to make about that trial are a couple of points. One, yeah, Tupac, he had this reputation of being very pro black woman because of, a number of his songs. And he was, if in interviews at the time, he talks about like being very concerned about how such a charge, would what it would do to his reputation and such. And also, like, it was the 90s, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but it was 25 years ago, in the sense that that behavior, I guess, was seen as relatively commonplace. And certainly, like, I remember watching a documentary about it was about like heavy metal people, and Gene Simmons basically tells like the same story, um of something similar happening, but like he never got arrested for it. And it's not not like trying to complain or anything. I'm not excusing any behavior, but what I am saying is that people like the police and the law, like the agents of the law, were on the lookout for like anything that they could possibly get him on. And so they made sure that he was prosecuted to the fullest extent, I suppose. And I understand why a lot of people felt like he was being persecuted, and why, for that trial, for that case, I understand why, people sincerely believe that. And that, because it was that case that sort of, made him like that turned him into an icon, basically. Specifically because of the way, he conducted a lot of interviews, and he, is always very articulate and good in interviews. And somebody in an interview was talking about how, like, we did the Million Man March that year, and yet all these kids cared about was Tupac. They didn't even care about that. Because then, yeah,
Mm.
basically after, so yeah, he records Me Against the World. Um, Basically, while that trial is going on, it comes out when he's in prison, and I think that's the first time he like goes platinum. He gets out, is signed to death row, and then immediately like
Yeah.
goes to work making All Eyes on Me.
I want to make sure we cover this as well, but on November 30th, 1994, this is before
Oh
the
yeah.
verdict of
Oh
the
yes, right.
sexual assault trial. He Yeah, he was robbed. Tupac Shakur was robbed and shot 5 times in quad recording studios in Manhattan. And Tupac Shakur believed it was a setup because he took his jewelry but left his Rolex watch. And so, yeah, he was shot 5 times, and he was in the courthouse in a wheelchair, recovering from bullet
Yeah, he checked
wounds.
himself out of the
And so,
hospital.
yeah, and in a 1995 interview with Vibe magazine, Tupac Shakur, he accused Sean currently P Diddy, he was
Oh
known as
god.
Puff Daddy at the time, Jimmy Henchman, and he also accused Notorious B.I.G. He accused Biggie, who before that Tupac Shakur and Biggie were friends, but he accused Biggie and P Diddy
or
of
or at
setting
least
up the
knowing
attack.
about it and not. I've seen in later interviews that basically it was sort of like the posse, the entourage around Biggie kind of did it. And yeah, there's another DJ. I think it's the interview with Treach from Naughty by Nature, which is an amazing interview. You should check that out.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah,
he talks about how like
yeah,
Biggie couldn't he knew that it happened and didn't do anything to stop it. And that was sort of the start of the East Coast West Coast beef, as it were, um, which is
Mm,
sort of
right.
a whole other thing. I don't know if we want to get to his murder now, or do we want to like? I was thinking maybe we kind of do that as a mini bonus.
Yeah, yeah. So and also just to clear up, he was bailed out by Suge Knight of Death Row Records for $1.4 million.
That's a
He was bailed
lot.
out by Suge Knight, and so that's when, right after he was released from prison, he Tupac Shakur recorded All Eyes on Me, which is a double that
Yeah,
was a double disc record. So before the days of streaming and all that, we had these things called CDs. And CDs would have like up to an
80 minutes,
hour's worth of music. So he recorded basically, yeah.
two
So he
hours.
recorded
Yeah,
basically a two disc,
yeah, and that went
yeah,
diamond, and
two
he
hour
was
album.
very clear that he was like, I believe that he was signed to a 3 album deal with Death Row, and it was also pretty clear that he was trying to fulfill his obligations as quickly as possible, because I don't know if it was that he wanted to get out of the game, or basically he wanted to move on and do other things, or at least have more independence. But yeah, he churned out All Eyes on Me, which I think ended up going diamond, like 10 times platinum. And then,
Yeah.
immediate,
Hmm.
sort of not far after that, makes he records As Machiavelli, the Don Illuminati theory, which
Hmm.
is it's a very interesting album. I would highly recommend anyone listen to it. I don't know if it's my favorite. I think Me Against the World is probably my favorite of his albums, but Don Illuminati
Yeah.
is really like a historical document. I mean, he captures so many things that were going on at that time, you know, with death row, and going on
Hmm.
in the city of Los Angeles. I think that was probably like his most complete work. Like, it really is like kind of a concept album, which a lot of rap albums are
Yeah.
not. And he does like from a production standpoint, it's the most interesting. There's this story about how the death row records in its heyday were completely ridiculous. I think partially because Suge Knight didn't know anything about music. So he like
Yeah.
basically rented out like Capitol Studios, which is like a major recording studio in LA. He like rented it out for a few months, and like flew in a bunch of like studio musicians. They're like smooth jazz artists. And there was this room called the Whack Room, which like I guess a lot of the sort of younger people were put in while they were like making stuff, because while Tupac was there, there's also Snoop Dogg and Corrupt and Daz, and yeah, I mean there's the whole
Hmm.
stable. And so, at some point, Tupac's trying to like, make this last album, basically to get out of this deal. And he like, basically, yeah, calls the Whack Room in, and like teach it. And from them, he's able to like put together, he records an album in 3 days. It's called, yeah, he records in 3 days.
Hmm.
It takes 4 days to mix it, and that's the 7 day theory. And they, yeah,
Yeah. And that like, I mean, recording it in an
that's a
entire
punk
album in three
thing.
days and mixing it in
That's
four.
some punk rock shit.
Yeah, that's you know, and that shows how like his work ethic was. And when it comes to his murder, I think we can just touch upon it briefly, but I think like there's a lot of there's so much when it comes to the murder investigation. I think is worthy of like a
Yeah,
mini
because we're
bonus
at
episode.
almost an hour,
But
so
you know, yeah. So I'll just kind of briefly touch upon his murder, but so um on September 7th, 1996, so Tupac Shakur was in Las Vegas, celebrating his business partner's birthday, and there was a Bruce Seldon versus Mike Tyson fight, and Tupac Shakur was with Suge Knight at the MGM Grand, um, and so there was apparently, so Suge Knight had real gang affiliations, and so I guess one of Suge Knight's associates spotted a guy named Orlando Anderson, who was a Crips gang member from Compton. Um, and I guess Anderson and a group of Crips had robbed a member of Death Row's entourage, and so when Tupac Shakur heard about that, him and Suge Knight's entourage basically got in a fight and beat up Orlando Anderson, and the fight was captured on hotel video surveillance. So in retaliation,
Supposedly.
Tupac Shakur, yeah. So Tupac Shakur gets in a car with Suge Knight, and apparently, they Suge Knight and Tupac pull up to a red light in a car, and then another car pulls up to them. um, they pull out guns and just start opening fire on the car. And the car is riddled with bullets. Tupac is shot multiple times. Suge Knight was grazed in the head, but Tupac Shakur basically took most of the damage, including a bullet into his right lung. So yeah, so Tupac was shot twice in the chest, once in the arm, once in the thigh. Um, so yeah, that's when
It was
Tupac was shot.
September
And keep in mind, this
1996.
was the yeah, and so he went to an intensive care unit, and he died on the afternoon
Yeah.
of September 13th, 1996. He was pronounced dead at 4:03 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Um, so yeah, so Tupac Shakur's body was cremated the next day. Um, And there's a lot of conspiracy theory when it comes to the murder of Tupac that I think we'll talk about. But um, yeah, so I think what we can do to wrap up, I think yeah, Peter, didn't you say that
Yeah.
you have a reason why you consider
Yes.
Tupac to be the
Yes.
greatest? So why
So,
don't you go into that?
LSD clarifies a lot of things. And what I realized, like the reason I argue that he is because he's really, you almost, there are other rappers who had better bars or perhaps better flows, I think, are technically skilled or are more skilled technically, um or perhaps even like had more hit records, though Tupac certainly had plenty. But Tupac is like in a class by himself. Like he's really like a culture, like a cultural icon in American history. I mean, I see him on the level of like Mark Twain or James Dean or something like that. Like he wasn't like he
Yeah,
really, you know, embodied, not just like, because this whole thing um wasn't just like, oh, a reflection of, urban poverty, but it was a reflection of a life lived unapologetically in urban poverty, from that background. And that was the whole thing about Thug Life. And this
yeah,
was the whole thing. And, people try to say that it killed him. We'll get into that later. But the point is that, like, that was what made him made such a flashpoint around him. And, his ability to communicate feeling and to communicate that interiority is why is he does it in a way few rappers have ever come close to doing. And I think he does it better. And like his knowledge of the hip hop, of the rap game, I mean, he was a pure artist. Like, this is the whole thing. And when trying to figure out how could he make Brenda's Got a Baby and Hit 'Em Up, right, or many of his problematic songs, you have to understand that like he was playing specific roles, and it didn't it didn't occur to him that he was like contradicting himself, because he was just making music. He was just making records. Um, and it was, he says like, I never had a record until I had a record. Like his legal troubles followed him as he became more of a public figure, precisely because he represented, this specific mentality, this spirit, um, that was not that, was very controversial. And sort of the 90s were still like a pretty conservative society, and people reacted to it very strongly. And what's also important is that like he got that spirit from his politics, which were explicitly communist. I mean, like the heritage he comes from is a, communist. Like the Black Panthers were Marxist Leninists. The new African Black Panther Party is, follows those principles as well. Like he was talking about, basically black love as a form of creating, of self-determination. And he was operating in like that new Africa being like the idea of a separate black homeland in what is now the United States South. um, there was a way in which he was trying to get, like, the project of Thug Life, and a lot of his music was trying to get from the sort of self-hatred wrought upon, um, brought upon by like decades of white supremacy and such, to like this revolutionary consciousness. Of course, he also had to play the game, the music industry game, and he did that very well. And I think that's what confused a lot of people, because they'll be like, "Oh, he represented the contradictions," but I think like at his core, like this was his message. And it's just like he had contracts to fulfill, and like there's a market for a specific type of music. This is why I highly recommend Don Killuminati, because I think it's the it it's the work that ties all those disparate threads together, and you can see sort of how,
Yeah,
what his actual thesis is.
I agree, and I think yeah, and I'll add to that that I think the reason why I wanted to kind of bring up like where rap is now, and because I hear like a lot of rap commentary, and I think rap at this point is sort of, I think, at an even more, well, I don't want to say identity crisis, but I think it's like, I think rap music, what it should have is, it needs to kind of figure out is what it is as an art form, and also preserve it, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what rap is, what the culture is. I think though, like whenever I hear people say like, "Do it for the culture," it's like, well, what
Mm-hmm.
what the fuck are you talking about? Like, which culture are you talking about? Because to me, when I think of rap music, it's just another offshoot of black culture, in the same way that blues, jazz, funk, gospel,
Yeah.
R&B are different. They're different facets of black culture, but they're not removed from black culture. So, um, that's why I wanted to talk about that, because I think um Tupac is a, yeah, in terms of American culture, like culture produced within the confines of the United States borders. Tupac is a very, very important cultural
No,
figure.
I mean
If not
globally.
even,
Yeah.
he's an important
uh,
global figure. I was, yeah, because I know Palestinians who
yeah.
connect with
Yeah.
Tupac's themes and his stories. So he's a very important global cultural figure, but he still has
Yeah.
roots in Black America. Like those are that's he is a Black American cultural product that you know a cultural Black American cultural figure who's admired by numerous people outside of the Black American community. And and I think rap music and rap commentators, I think, should be a little bit more clear in terms of what they mean by the culture. And I think it'll be easier to sort of define, like, okay, well, what do we consider? good rap music, what is considered bad rap music, and who are the greats and who are the peoples we should be holding up, because rap music at this point is going almost it's almost 50
Oh
years
my
old.
god.
So it needs to kind of decide, think about it, because like at this point rap music needs to decide, like, okay, who are the standard bearers, the greats of rap music. Rock music already has that defined.
Beatles
Beatles,
suck.
um, Rolling Stones, all the yeah, but they've defined it. They've defined who their cultural leaders are in rock music. Beatles. Every time I talk to someone who's into rock music or indie, it's always Beatles. Study the Beatles. And when it comes to rap music, I don't think that question is fully resolved. Like who are the real greats? And I think Tupac Shakur, I think, is a major standard bearer in rap music. But also I think like he has a crossover appeal in which he's able to transcend rap music in a similar way that Michael Jackson was able to. Um, and I think that's why I compare Tupac to the blues tradition, because there's something very bluesy about his his stories, um, his themes, that I don't think is that far removed from the greats of the African American blues tradition. Um, and also, I think whenever I hear people talk about rap music and what makes it good, it's just kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying, Peter. I do notice people say like, okay, who has the best bars? Who has the best flow? Who can rap the most syllables? Who can rap the fastest? Who has the most records? That's not to say that all of that's irrelevant. That's all fine. But I think a lot of that emphasis on technicality overlooks what makes
Yeah.
it great art. And so not only is Tupac a great rapper, he's a great artist. There's something about this is pure art, because I would also venture this. I would also say, like, even when it comes to
Yeah. Oh yeah.
technicality,
I mean,
Tupac still had that. He had his own
I'm
flow.
not saying he was a slouch in any of that. I'm saying that I understand other people can make arguments for other
Yeah,
people in any specific category, but nobody was able
yeah,
to tie it all together with
yeah,
the emotion and depth of feeling that he did. So, all right, I think
yeah.
maybe let's sign off. I gotta go to the bathroom, and then let's get back on for real
Okay,
conspiracy hours, where we talk about who we think killed him.
yeah,
And if you
totally.
want to hear that, subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/real Sankara hours. I think overall we want to do more stuff in this realm of like getting into sort of broader historical topics and cultural stuff, since we both, and also more music stuff since that's kind of our thing. So stay tuned,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
hmm yeah, yeah. And I'll just wrap up with this one thought, and that something that gets overlooked is yeah, the importance of feelings and interiority in art and music, that I think should be considered a an important metric, so to speak, in rap music. And I think I agree with Peter, and I just want to emphasize that point. I think Tupac had that in spades, and I've yet to kind of come across a rapper who is at that level when it comes to the kind of raw emotional depth and interiority that he portrayed. Um, his raps, his story, his narrative, and also the narrative of the Black American condition. And with that, we shall sign out. And yeah, subscribe, Real Sankara, patreon.com/Real Sankara hours, $5 a month. You'll get twice as many episodes um, and more stuff.
Peace.
All right. And with that, we'll sign out. Peace. Later.